Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberkaş. After warning the world for years about the national security threats posed by the PKK-linked YPG terror group, Turkey has taken matters into its own hands. On October the 9th, it launched Operation Peace Spring into northern Syria. It had the following objectives: clear Turkey's border regions of terrorists and create a safe zone for refugees to return home to. The US pulled its troops from the area and international condemnation followed. Some of Turkey's NATO allies have decided to side with a terrorist group that directly threatens one of its own members. What's behind this trust gap, especially when it comes to security concerns? Why have so many Western countries ignored Turkey's warnings, while also expecting it to host millions of Syrian refugees? And to answer that, joining me now is Murat Aslan, who is an assistant professor at Hasan Kalyoncu University, and by Matthew Bryza, who is a former US ambassador. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Murat, I want to start with you. The international community is very critical for Turkey's operations Peace Spring. Turkey has been warning its partners and saying that we're running out of patience. But tell me about the objectives of Turkey with this operation and what Turkey wants to achieve.
Actually, the objective of this operation has clearly announced by President Erdogan, and it's the same as the ones that was announced in the previous operations in Syria. The clear one is, first, the border security, because Turkey is concerned with the border security. We know that there are attacks emanating from the south part of the border. And the second one is countering terrorism over there. Turkey does not want to see any kind of terror formation in Syria that could be territorialized and also be a de facto state in future. And finally, humanitarian aspect. We know that Turkey is keen to send back the Syrians to this part of Syria by establishing a kind of secure zone and also building up states and also an economy maybe in terms of restructuring activities.
But unfortunately, Turkey's allies don't seem to be believing in this safe zone. I want to turn to Matthew. There's a huge reaction, Matthew, to Turkey's operation. Why do you think its allies do not understand Turkey's security concerns? What's the reason behind that?
I think you were just getting to it a moment ago. I think that Turkey's allies just don't believe that the objectives truly are the ones articulated by President Erdogan. And it may be simply because they've seen such terrible tragedy and brutality in Syria that they've come to expect terrible things to happen. But I find it hard to accept as formerly a representative of one of NATO's leading countries that the alliance is not taking Turkey's stated objectives at face value, particularly when we look back and see how Turkey behaved and the Turkish military behaved in Operation Olive Branch, both operations, in fact, since 2016, where unlike the assault on Raqqa or Aleppo or Damascus, the Turkish side did not wholesalely destroy the buildings. And in fact, people have been able to return to Afrin. I think that story, that good news story, just is not so well known in the West, in Washington and in European capitals. And I think there simply is an assumption that if Turkey's doing it, there must be something wrong with it because people are angry about the S-400s and then President Erdogan in general. And so I think there's just a lack of understanding, or put it a different way, ignorance in the West.
Okay. On the other hand, we've been reading reports about US Senator Lindsey Graham. He was apparently pranked by two Russians posing as the Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar. He said some damning things. Let's have a listen.
Your YPG Kurdish problem is a real problem. I told President Trump that Obama made a huge mistake in relying on the YPG Kurds. Everything I worried about has come true. And now we got to make sure that Turkey's protected from this threat in Syria. I'm sympathetic to the YPG problem. And so is the president, quite frankly. You were right about this threat. You see me on television, that we owe it to Turkey not to create a problem on your border in northeastern Syria.
Yes, during the phone call, he was accommodating Turkey's concerns, but on publicly, he talks the opposite lately. Matthew, I want to ask this to you. Can you talk about the evolution of Lindsey Graham, and what does this tell us about the US politics?
Well, one thing I can say is Lindsey Graham has a bit of a history of flipping his position. So if you think back to the 2016 election campaign, he was an opponent of President Trump's, and he and Trump had some very harsh exchanges on the campaign trail. And now Lindsey Graham is maybe the president's strongest supporter in the US Senate, certainly on foreign policy. So when it comes to this specific issue, I do think Lindsey Graham sincerely agrees that the United States has a responsibility to help eliminate the threat that the YPG poses to Turkey. I do think he sincerely believes that it was a mistake by the U.S. Under President Obama to partner with the YPG rather than Turkey. At the same time, he's a politician. And I think he's feeling which way the political wind is blowing in Washington. Going back to the previous question, we've got a complete lack of understanding or lack of belief in what Turkey's actual goals are for this operation, and an assumption that Turkey is going to do the same sort of military intervention, frankly, that Russia has been involved with the Assad regime, and absolutely leveling entire sections of cities.
Yeah, so it seems, Murat, Lindsey Graham changes his mind easily, and he was at the forefront of sanctions on Turkey. So after this point, should Turkey take his threats seriously?
Well, it's first internal affair of the United States, because I know that he has in a position to have all parties be compromised against Turkey. But I think their agendas are important to explain this, because we know that there's an election in the United States in 2020, and I do not know what the projection of Lindsey Graham is, because maybe he is very concerned about the future of his own party and want to keep the party tight.
Maybe, huh?
And he is in deep need to deliver some speeches favoring PKK, PYD, just to keep the party in one body. So we have to, focus on the agenda of Graham.
So as for the operation, major concern of the international community seems to be the Daesh fighters and the prisoners and their fate. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan just made it clear that if Turkey takes control of these areas, Daesh will be under Turkey's responsibility and they'll be dealt with accordingly. So what more could Turkey do to tamp down these concerns of the international community as well as its allies, of course?
The first issue is that there's a Guantanamo experience of the United States. So this issue has appeared a kind of hot topic in the US community. But there's also another aspect. Turkey is very stick to law, which means Turkey will take the control of all these prisoners and later then must apply Turkish or Syrian law to be judged, because these guys are in prison and they were not before a judge. So other than that, we know that international law is very important. So it's a matter of not only political decision, but also it has a judicial aspect.
So, Matthew, I want to get back to you. We know that Turkey neutralized more than 3,000 Daesh fighters, and it is one of the countries which got struck by Daesh attacks, unfortunately. Like just 4 years ago, there was an attack in Ankara which killed 109 Turkish citizens, which was the highest number of people killed in Turkey's modern history. So that's very important. So do you think, isn't it in the interest of those countries that Daesh is dealt with a state like Turkey instead of a terror organization like the YPG?
Yeah, well, I mean, that question answers itself. It would always be better, from my perspective, that the United States is working as closely as possible with all of its NATO allies, but especially with Turkey, NATO's second largest military, in this place, in Turkey's own backyard. So that is much better. And I would just like to add that if this operation sticks to the goals as articulated by President Erdogan, I think this whole controversy about whether or not Turkey should be doing this will go away, because these are goals that the entire transatlantic community shares: the goal of defeating Daesh, the goal of creating a safe zone into which refugees can return, and the goal of pushing back the YPG away from Turkey's border. Even if some people in the US government don't understand that the YPG doesn't represent all Syrian Kurds, it remains the policy of the US government to push the YPG back.
And what is the perception in the US, let's say, public opinion? Do you believe that YPG is fighting Daesh for the United States or for Europe or for world, or it is fighting it for its own political entities?
Yeah, so very few Americans outside of specialists and practitioners of foreign affairs are aware of this issue. But at the high level of experts, I just cite President Obama's previous national security advisor, Susan Rice, who a couple of nights ago on a talk show in Washington, D.C., said, yeah, the YPG has been sacrificing for us on our behalf for the United States. I think that is ridiculous. The YPG is fighting for itself. Its goal is to establish a Marxist-Leninist state in northeast Syria that adheres to the cultish ideology of the PKK.
Yeah. Okay, there's another aspect. There has been some fake news that with the start of this operation, Turkish soldiers attacked Christian villages and killed Christians. They all proved to be wrong. We all know that there's an overwhelming support within Turkey after the Turkish political parties expressed their supports. But just lately, Turkey's Armenian Patriarchate released a statement expressing support for the operation. Let's listen to it and then we'll continue to talk.
The Armenian Patriarchy of Turkey has always emphasized peace and harmony of people. But the chaotic environment in the Middle East concerns us. Unfortunately, the establishment of peace is not possible in a peaceful way sometimes. We pray for the success of the operation to put an end to terrorism near our borders. May God Almighty save our people and our country from all sorts of disaster and disgrace.
Yes, we listened to the Armenian Patriarchate's statements. What is the current mood in Turkey? What do you see? I mean, how do Turkish public opinion as well as political parties, in your opinion, approach to this operation?
Okay, first, this statement is very important because we know that there are people over there who are Armenian descent. And this statement clearly supports Turkey. And it is a clear indication that Armenian community in Turkey does want Turkey to be in Syria to secure all these people, because we know that PKK is a threat to the public living inside Syria, and we have witnessed it, because they expelled about 400,000 Kurds from this region to Turkey, including some Armenians. So it's significant. The second thing, there is a unity in Turkey, except one political party, because now people are really tired of attacks of PKK and do not want to face similar undertakings in future. So Turkey is united and committed, and political leadership, as I see, continues to end this operation successfully without any hesitation if their sentiments are concerned for the last 1 month.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Operation Peace Spring will be continuing, I believe, and we'll be watching the developments as they unfold. Matthew and Murat, thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Turkey says some European capitals are misrepresenting the goals of Operation Peace Spring. President Erdogan has called criticism of the operation unwarranted, given the security threats and economic burden Turkey has faced since the Syrian war began in 2011. While the nation's ties with Europe has strained over the years, this wasn't always the case. 70 years ago, the Council of Europe was formed to promote the continent's common values. Turkey was one of its earliest members and a strong advocate. Our correspondent, Gonca Sena, attended a commemorative ceremony for the European Council in Strasbourg.
The Second World War devastated Europe. To avoid it ever happening again, The leaders of the continent in 1949 created the Council of Europe. Today, the Council champions human rights, democracy, and the rule of law through its many institutions. Turkey is one of the founding members. But that hasn't spared it from some of the challenges posed by the Council. Turkey's journey over the last 70 years has been unique. Throughout that time, the country faced many political and security challenges, but it has also had to answer questions and criticisms. Over the decades, military coups in Turkey and dealing with the PKK terror group have tested Turkey.
We come from a different region, a different geography, with many difficulties. I don't think there's any other country who has this many specific threats around it.
A former Council of Europe president says all the challenges and disputes with Turkey in the past were overcome through mutual respect.
Look at the map and see that if Turkey was not there, we would have had a very big black hole in Europe.
Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu says Turkey has helped to create and maintain a pan-European organization. He has served as the president in the Council's Parliamentary Assembly. He calls his election one of the turning points for relations between Turkey and the Council of Europe.
When I put my candidature, everybody was surprised. When I won the election primary, the political group, it was a big shock for many others. And many members, not many members, countries, but many members from few countries try to stop my candidature. That's why they wanted to prolong the term of the previous or then president. And unfortunately, I had to be another committee while they debated this in the committee. We reversed that. And by one vote, only by one vote. So then I was able to become president.
But with every challenge met, others seem to always come forward. Today, one in particular concerns Turkey.
What I see from Turkey is that this parliamentary assembly particularly, and this organization has been very much polarized because of all this, the rise of the extremism, racism, xenophobia, far right and far left ideologies. Everybody is underlining the far right extremist ideologies on the rise, but far left is as dangerous as far right. That's what I see, because far left is promoting terrorism. Here at the Parliamentary Assembly, instead of those core values, human rights, democracy, rule of law, and universal values, ideologies have been dominating the work of the Assembly.
The Council of Europe has now survived and thrived for 70 years, but despite its successes, there are undeniably difficult times ahead. Gonca Şenay, TRT World, Strasbourg.
And joining me now is Dimitri Sarouhas, who is an associate professor of international relations at Bilkent University, and Özgür Ünal Eriş, who is an associate professor of political science and international relations at 29 Mayıs University. Dimitri, Özgür, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Despite ups and downs, Turkey has been an integral part of Europe and NATO for over 70 years now. But lately, things have changed the other way around. So now Turkey, having launched its long-planned cross-border operation into Syria, the European Union urged Turkey to halt it. So, Dimitri, the first question is for you. Why there is this huge gap of trust between Turkey and the European Union?
I think in order to understand why this reaction has been the one it has, one needs to go a bit back into the recent history of relations between the two sides. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, Europe has not been able to play any active role in the Syrian conflict and is very fearful of civilian casualties and the potential long-lasting consequences of Turkey's decision. Now, this is not to fully justify what the position that Europe has taken, but it is part of the gap of trust that you just outlined, which happens to be mutual. Turkey, on the other hand, has also been ready to accuse the European Union on a number of issues in the past, And I think that the fact that Europe has not been able to play a more active role in the Syrian process has left it outside. Its reaction for now has been rather muted. I think it has been trying to maintain a position that will make its position distinct from the one that the United States and Russia have on the subject. But I think that a lot will depend on how the operation will continue. If it is going to be long-lasting, what the consequences of it will be, it is likely that Europe may have to shift its position as well.
So we know that Turkey has been fighting terrorism for decades now, and 40,000 lives were lost. Now we see the European Union lecturing Turkey on how to deal with this terrorism problem. Or is this a more convenient way to criticize President Recep Tayyip Erdogan?
Well, of course, Turkey is definitely much more, like finding ways basically to fight against terrorism for the last maybe like 30 years. And the thing is, this is really convenient, I think, for the European Union, because the European Union is kind of like making it sure that Turkey should be kept at the periphery rather than actually becoming a full member ultimately. Especially we can see that through the progress reports that has been published like almost every year. And in those progress reports, we have been seeing that Turkey is definitely criticized for fulfillment of its democracy and like human rights and other political issues. So therefore, when it comes to fighting against terrorism and also the tools that Turkey actually is using to fight against terrorism, this is kind of seen like a proof from the perspective of the European Union that Turkey is not actually fulfilling the democratic tools.
But on the other hand, we see Turkey fighting terrorism, name it Daesh or PKK terrorism, and safeguarding in a way Europe's borders. So how justified is this, Dmitry?
I think I'm glad you're raising it, because sometimes we may get the impression that relations between the two sides have now reached a complete point of standstill, which is actually not true. What we are observing in recent years, despite the gap in trust that you rightly mentioned before, is that there is a new kind of transactional relationship between the two sides. So the EU-Turkey deal on the migration and refugee crisis is a very good example of how the two sides can actually work together on particular issues in which they share common interests. And of course, the fight against terrorism is most certainly one of them. The important point there is to make sure that both sides soften their rhetoric without mutual accusations, without blackmails, without creating a sort of atmosphere that will hamper the relations going forward. Because yes, they are now at a relatively low point, but relations have been so long-lasting and they have been better in the past. I think they can become better in the future too.
But Turkey says, actually calls on the European Union, if you call this operation an invasion, I'll open the gates for 3.6 million refugees. What does the European Union want? It doesn't want this operation to continue. It doesn't want more refugees. It doesn't want to help Turkey financially. It doesn't want Turkey to set up the safe zone where up to 2 million Syrian refugees could return home to. So what do you make of it, Özgür?
Well, I think that definitely, I mean, this is an important issue for the European Union, especially that they definitely don't want the refugees to enter to the European Union like even more than they have been entering. So therefore, I think also the European Union is aware of the fact that Turkish government and Turkey wants to make even like more progress, especially in visa liberalization. So therefore, this is kind of like a, like a negotiation, because visa liberalization is very important for the citizens of Turkey. And of course, the Turkish government is aware of that. And the European Union is aware of that as well. So that this is kind of like saying, if you really want the visa liberalization process to continue, then you have to be getting closer to the point that we have about the refugees, and you should stop the operation because that will cause more refugees coming into the European Union. How could more refugees come to the European Union when Turkey is launching this offensive in northern Syria? If the refugees are to come, they would probably go to the south. So this is not a true I think the idea
expression.
here is that, if the Turkish government decides to relocate some of the Syrian people that are actually under temporary protection because they are not really officially called as refugees inside Turkey, as you would know. And if the Turkish government decides to relocate them to the safety zone, then they will try to find a way through that safety zone to go into Europe. That's like one idea, you know,
That's
that
the
they
fear,
have.
I believe.
Exactly.
Right? It's
yeah.
maybe Europe's fear may solve the Syrian problem, unfortunately. But as we see, Europe is quite divided nowadays. So thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.